Carter Burwell, you're nominated for an Oscar for Best Score for composing the music for Carol, which is about the romance between two women in the 1950s. It's your first Oscar nomination, and you've been composing film scores for several years now. So what was it like to find out you were nominated?
Well, it's exciting. So a couple of decades ago, I stopped waiting for it to happen, but I think the score's gotten a good response generally. I mean, since they premiered the film at Cannes, the people have been talking about the music. So I'm very thrilled about the film, and I think it's great that it gets this kind of recognition, and the music does too.
It's kind of surprising that looking at it from our perspective, awards watchers' perspective, that this is your first nomination, considering that you've written scores for several movies that have been up for Oscars, like No Country for Old Men and Adaptation and Fargo and several others. Is there something special to you personally about your Carol score that you think stands out compared to others?
I thought you were going to ask, is there something special about me that stops them from ever nominating me? Well, I think that for one thing, it's a traditional score in a way that, for instance, No Country for Old Men certainly was not. It's humans playing instruments, and the music is very upfront in the mix. It's very noticeable, and it really plays the part of a character. There are basically two characters in the movie, and the music is plays a role of the third character. So it's very upfront, which, and all these things I think make it more likely that the music branch would recognize it. But I have to say, to be honest, I think that the music branch is doing a better job of recognizing unusual scores. Like Gravity, I thought was that's an unusual score, and I thought it was great that got the award a few years ago. So I think they're opening their mind about what the definition of a film score can be. But this one is fairly traditional.
It is interesting that you mentioned that non-traditional scores have been doing better. It's because music is such a broad and diverse field that you also have The Social Network from a few years ago, which was a very non-traditional winning. Do you like that sense that things are opening up that way? That it's open to more kinds of music.
Well, I love that. I think it's very important that the industry and the Academy are open to more kinds of music. That say, by its nature, feature film is a conservative business. The amount of money involved in making a feature film does tend to make people be a little cautious. And so anything that will bring in new voices and new sounds, I think, is great. And I'm glad that that's happening slowly.
Now, this year in particular, there is an impressive lineup in that best score category. In addition to you've got a couple of living legends, Ennio Morricone and John Williams, and then you've got Thomas Newman, who was nominated for the 13th time. What's it like being in that company this year?
Well, it's great. That's actually sort of my favorite thing about it, is just to, and I know Tom. We're basically the same generation, but I only got to know Johan a couple of months ago from doing these awards type press junkets, and I still haven't met Williams or Morricone, but I'm really looking forward to it. Obviously, I grew up listening to their music, and it was, I think it's thrilling to be in that group.
Carol is directed by Todd Haynes, and you've had a chance to work with him a couple times before. Does that make it a smoother process for you as a composer to develop your ideas for the score?
I think so. For one thing, of course, we know how each other communicates. When part of a composer's job is putting sketches of the music in front of the director, and then eventually, after he's approved them, we record it with real instruments in a real studio. But knowing how that translation occurs, having been through it once before, makes it easier for me to present rough things to Todd, because he knows that in the end, I'm going to make it sound good. So I can, the fact that we've done this before means I can play things for him that are very rough, and he knows that eventually I'm going to turn it into music. But there's also, I think, just a level of trust too, where he'll I mean, for instance, in the case of Carol, I don't think he ever suggested anything about what the music should be prior to my starting to write. He showed it to me. He was eager to hear what I would do, and we kind of left it at that. And then once I'm writing, then we have wonderful conversations about it. That because he's very astute, I think, musically, and I enjoy hearing what he has to say. But that level of trust with a director that you know, I think, helps a lot too. It allows you to go a little farther out, in terms of trying different things, which is nice.
How far along is the film, Carol, or basically any film that you compose music for, by the time you start working on the music? Like, do you see a rough cut of the film beforehand, or do you see certain scenes, or are you in it from the, working on it from the ground up?
Well, it does vary. Typically, I don't write anything until I see something. That there's so many different ways to shoot a script that I don't feel that the script by itself, tells me that much. Maybe some directors, if you know the director and you know the script, maybe you can make some guess about what kind of movie it's going to be. But I don't feel that doesn't work for me, honestly. I need to see what it looks like, and particularly with someone like Todd, who's very much a visual stylist. I can't begin to guess what the film is really going to look like until he shows me some. In this case, he showed me the whole film, an assembly of the film. A lot of times people will just, like people that I know well, like Joel and Ethan Coen, they'll show me a few shots, one scene or something, and we'll just look at it, in the editing system, and they'll talk me through what they're planning to do with it. But again, we know each other so well that they're not embarrassed to show me something that's really rough, and I'm not embarrassed to show them something that's really rough. For Carol, I saw the whole film and then went off and started to think of what I would say.
It's interesting to imagine a film, especially a film like Carol, where the music does play a prominent part. To actually watch it without the music, it seems almost like it's naked in a way. Was there any particular scene or moment from the film that you sort of latched onto that was particularly inspiring to you musically, that maybe drove a lot of your ideas for the rest of the film?
That's a good question, but honestly, my answer is a little perverse. I actually started with the first scene of the movie, in which none of the characters appear. So it doesn't make any sense, really. But I thought, Todd basically shot that scene as an overture to the film. It's just introducing New York in the 50s, a sense of darkness and activity and excitement, a little bit of foreboding. And for some reason, I really started there and came up with something for that, and then I kind of went chronologically through the film, which again is not. I don't usually do that. I guess I just wanted my ideas to develop over the course of the story, as each step of the love story takes place, that the music would take a step along with that. So as the story goes on, I'm writing and developing the themes, developing them, interweaving them. And for whatever reason, I kind of wrote it in order, honestly. And the last scene, if you've seen the film, is the big climax, and there's no dialogue. It's entirely driven by music and visuals. And so I just really had my fingers crossed that everything I'd been doing through the rest of the film would actually work in the last scene. But I think it did. But that was, I can't explain why I did it, exactly why I wrote that way, but that's how I did it.
You've been a very prolific composer, especially of late. I believe you wrote the scores for like 5 films last year, which also included Legend and Anomalisa. I'm sure it varies from film to film, but from beginning to end, how long does the process of writing a complete score usually take?
Not long enough. It's always really a question of how long they give me, and I think I can speak for all film composers when I say that I wish we had more time. But the schedule of making a film is basically kept as tight as it can be so they don't have to keep everybody on payroll. So in the case of Carol, I think I had 8 weeks, but probably 6 weeks is more of a industry standard. with the Coen Brothers, it's quite a bit more because they cut their own films, so they're giving themselves time as well as giving myself time, and they also work with extremely small crew. It's not like they have a lot of people on payroll. But yeah, if I had more time, I would write better music. But I can only do what I can do. So you basically put everything else in life aside, and sleep and that sort of thing, and you just try to get it all on the page before the recording session.
Are there any particular specific thoughts that go into the very specific details of a score, like the style of it, whether it's a conventional orchestral score or sort of a non-traditional score, or what particular instruments will inspire a certain mood in the right way, like prominent strings here or prominent piano here, that sort of thing?
All those things. I mean, all those things are critically important. You could take a score, you could take Carol or something else and just put it on different instruments, and even if all the notes were the same, it would be completely different. It would have completely different meaning and completely different emotional impact. So all those elements are very important, and it's one of, at the same time that I'm thinking of melody and harmony, I'm thinking of what the instrumental voices are going to be, and whether, and for a movie like No Country for Old Men, it's all sort of electronic tones and things. I couldn't use any actual instruments. So every time we heard something that sounded like a real instrument, it could decrease the tension in the movie. So every film has its own problems, that you try to solve with these tools. But the choice of instruments is very important, and that process of saying these notes are going to go on these instruments. These notes will be clarinet, oboe. This is how I'm going to voice the strings, the violins, violas, cellos. That's called orchestration. And sometimes when you have a huge score, if you're doing a 90-minute score and you've got 2 months to do it in, I don't have time to orchestrate. Most people don't. But this year, I'm fortunate that I think almost all these scores that you mentioned, like Anomalisa, Legend, Carol, Mr. Holmes, I orchestrated all of them. So that's very satisfying to me, to really be able to get down there into the trenches and do that work. I love it.
Do you have any particular instrument or style of music that is your favorite to write music for?
I try not to have a favorite instrument or style. I think it's important to try to let the film as much as possible dictate those things. I'm a keyboard player, so I work at the piano or a keyboard attached to a computer, but it's really important aspect of being a composer to not just write for the instrument that's your instrument. Some composers are, I think Alexandre Desplat, I was talking to him, he was a flautist, that was his instrument. And I think Tom Newman may have started on violin. I do ask them. Everyone's got their instrument, but it's very important if you're going to be a composer to not just write to write what's familiar to you on your instrument. You have to be able to imagine that you're a clarinetist, and imagine that you're a bass player, and imagine you're a percussionist. So I try not to have any favorite instruments or any favorite styles really when I'm working.
One of your previous collaborations with Todd Haynes was the TV miniseries Mildred Pierce, for which you actually won an Emmy for your score. And you also composed the Olive Kitteridge miniseries score also recently. Is it a different experience writing music for TV, or is it more or less the same process?
Well, I've never done open-ended episodic television, and that I think would be very different. I don't know how. When you don't know where the ending is, where you don't know what the end of the story is, I don't know how people do that. I wouldn't know how. But the ones you're talking about, these, we treated Mildred Pierce basically like a 5-hour movie. That's the way Todd and I looked at it. And each section has its own particular story elements that take place at different times, because decades go by over the course of the 5 episodes. But there are themes that are in common amongst them. And anyway, we viewed it really as one 5-hour film, which of course meant it's a melodrama as well. So there's a lot of music within each episode. So anyway, it was a ton. It's terrible to say, but at a certain point, it comes down to numbers. You know, my job does certain. You think I have to write this many minutes of music in this many weeks, and yeah, with Mildred Pierce, it was a lot of minutes of music. Olive Kittredge was a little more spare in the style. It's not a melodrama, but I really viewed them as films. I didn't think of it as television. It's true, it comes in the form of chapters, but I don't think it really changed the way I work that much, except, as I say, that it's just more music to write. And, that is a challenge, not just in terms of the logistics, but staying interested. After a certain number of hours of film, it can be hard to say, okay, here we go, the last hour, I'm going to, I'm really excited. It's a bit of a challenge.
Besides Todd Haynes, you have done a lot of work with the Coen Brothers, as you've mentioned, including Hail Caesar, which just came out, and going all the way back to their first film, Blood Simple. What has that collaboration been like over the years, spanning so many different styles and tones? Their films really run the gamut.
I know, it's true. Well, first I'll say that, I've been very fortunate that because they don't want to repeat themselves, it's given me the opportunity to cover a lot of ground as a composer. There's a tendency, I think, for everyone in this business to kind of get typecast, whether you're an actor or director, writer, or composer. And fortunately, Joel and Ethan have done all these different things. I remember, I think their second film was Raising Arizona, and when that came out, the music's pretty noticeable in that film. And I think it was Ethan said, you're going to get a lot of calls for farm comedies now. And I'd never heard of farm comedies, but indeed there is a genre, I guess, farm comedies. And indeed I did get calls for people who wanted me to do farm comedies. I didn't do any of them, but it is easy to think to get typecast. Unfortunately, they don't. They're always trying to do something new. So it's given me a chance to try lots of different things. I mean, I'm not exactly answering your question, but I'll get around to it. But like Miller's Crossing is an orchestral score, and they wanted an orchestral score for that movie to match the lush look of the film. And they knew perfectly well that I knew nothing about writing orchestral music, nothing. And yet they asked me to do it. So that was, that's the kind of opportunity that this collaboration has afforded me. And, they're kind of crazy for not hiring someone who knows what they're doing, but it does, I think we have a manner of communicating. We have similar outlooks on film. So it still seems to come together usually. In terms of the way we collaborate or work together, it really hasn't changed much, honestly. I mean, I think we've all learned things about what we do. They've learned things as filmmakers and editors, and I've learned things as a composer, but the way we interact, I don't think it's changed really at all, honestly.
Well, I want to congratulate you again on your nomination for Carol, and all the work that you continue to do with the Coen Brothers and beyond. And thank you so much for talking to me today.
That was my pleasure. Thanks. Bye.